Welcome to the Avodas HaParsha Shir, which, as you can see, is not taking place in Ner Avram this week. It's Asar B'Teves, and the schedule in Shul is different, so I am recording it at home to send out and share with listeners. The Shir be Le'ili Nishmas, Rav Moshe ben Rav Yitzchak Meir Shapira, Rav Moshe Shapira Zatzal, from whom so many of my teachers and I myself learned so much, who opened up so many different pathways of Torah. Okay, tonight we're going to be focusing on the puzzling psukim of the brachas that Yaakov Avinu gave to his sons, and especially what appear to be the non-brachas to Shimon and Levi. Shimon v'Levi achim klei chamas mecheruseim. Right, Shimon and Levi are brothers. Right, the vessels of violence are theirs. The Sodom al tovo nafshi, in their secret, let my soul not join them. B'koholam al techad kavodi, let not my honor be there in their gathering. Ki ba'apam hargu ish, because in their anger they killed the person of Ritzonam, and they desired to ikru shor, to uproot a shore, which again is referring to Yosef, says Rashi. So he's referring to their murder of the people of Shechem, who had violated Dinah, and to this, but he curses their anger, right, which is there in the beginning. Now, we don't find a real bracha for them. It's true that at the end of the brachas, it says, Ish keberchaso berach osam, that all were included in all the brachas, so that includes them as well, but it seems so strange. In other words, we must erase from our head the picture of Shimon and Levi as some kind of brutes or ruffians that had no control over themselves. As we can see from the continuation of history, and this is a principle that I heard once from Neven Sal Shlita, the Rav of the Old City, is that when you're looking at Pshat in the Chumash, Pshat is not an isolated word or line. Pshat is in the context of how the Chumash continues, how Jewish history continues, how Torah Shebaal Peh continues. And here we see that Levi went on to found that line of Levi, which produced Moshe and Aaron, the Levim, the Kohanim. And Shimon also becomes an honored member of the tribes of Am Yisrael. Jewish boys are named Shimon, left and right. So let's try to see what is really being said here. So the question was asked by the Me'or V'Shemesh, one of the early Hasidic commentaries on the Torah. He says, Eino muvan, it can't be understood. Yaakov Avinu olav Hashem lo yivorech hashnei shvatim hakedoshim ha'elu. That Yaakov Avinu will not give a bracha to these two holy shvatim, even though he did in the end give them a bracha among all of Am Yisrael. Still, so he comes to explain the following. He says, you can have a Jew who reaches a very high level of Yir Shamayim. He's a very God-fearing person. And he serves Hashem truly. He really understands, believes, and serves Hashem with great fervor. But, as he says, it has a certain negative effect in the way he sees himself. On one hand, it's true, he's very honest with himself. He finds things lacking in himself constantly. He views himself as very small and lowly in his own eyes. He constantly sees wrongdoings that he does, averos, even if they're very, very subtle, like a hair's breadth, but to him, they're like a thick rope. And he complains about himself and is upset with himself. The result of it is that when people come to speak to him, he seems to be a very angry person, even though truly his anger is really focused on himself, and the anger is idealistic, feeling that he is not fulfilling what he should in serving Hashem. So he says, I heard in the name of Toli of Ropshitz, right, that the Gemara tells us in Maseches Tainis, Hai Talmud Chacham Shorasach, when you see a Talmud Chacham who seems angry, it's Oraisa Hu Durasach Bei. It's the Torah that's, so to speak, flaming, cooking inside of him, right? And this is supposed to help us judge him more favorably. because he feels he hasn't done justice to the Torah that he's learning, and he's not at the level that he's at. He hasn't fulfilled the mitzvahs as he should, and therefore he's angry with himself. So on one hand, right, this is something that seems very lofty. But the problem is, he says, tzaddik like this, eno yochel lichyuch sim habrios. He cannot live with other people. Rak hu bifnei atzma oved Hashem. He has this lonely life of serving Hashem by himself, because he's always angry with himself by something that he didn't do as fully as he would want. So therefore, he certainly can't allow himself to speak with people, b'milei da'alma, have conversations with people, schmooze with people, right? Because it's constantly going to be in his mind the Avodas Hashem he could be doing in that time. He could be learning, he could be davening, he could even be doing chesed. But he says, therefore, he can't be ma'urav im habrios, he can't be intermingled with other people. So he has to be in this loneliness. Now he says, even though this path shows a certain very high level, a madrega gedola, he says, afal pichein ein ze emes lamito. This is not the true way in which Hashem wants us to serve Him. Hu adain besitra de morashchora, because if you would see which umbrella he's under, so to speak, he's under the umbrella of morashchora, the black bitterness, which is what the Sroim call depression. And again, this is not a depression like a medical depression. That's something a person doesn't bring upon themselves. This is because of his outlook. And he has to know, right, that when such a person, right, we have to know when such a person comes to speak with someone, if people want to ask him about something, he doesn't realize that that's also Avodas Hashem, and that we're supposed to serve Hashem in all ways, not just in one way of isolated learning and davening. He says, the Pasuk in Mishlei tells us, B'chol drachecha da'ehu. Know, which means connect with Hashem in all ways, in all your ways, in all ways of life. So he says, tamid b'simcha. So whatever situation HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts you in, you're supposed to be constantly b'simcha. Even if at that time, according to the way he views things, he is not able to be serving Hashem in the way that he would want to do. That his Avodas Hashem is limited in many different aspects. And he feels pain for this, but he says, nonetheless, he should be totally besimcha. He should realize that this is the Avodah HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to be doing now, and he will be intermingled with people, as Chazal tell us in Maseches Ksuvas, La'olam te'daito shel adam mu'ureves im habrios. You should be together with Hashem's creations. Now the Mesilas Yesharim adds an interesting caveat on this, that if you're in a society that's very negative and people are behaving animalistically, and they try to quote that Gemara at you, you have to be ma'urev in habrios. So he says you should answer them. That's for brios who are acting as humans, not acting animalistically. Okay, but in general, this type of person who's on such a high level can feel that any normal day-to-day conversations with people is stopping him from doing things that are so much higher, so much greater, and therefore he has to understand that that is Avodas Hashem, that that is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us, and that he's serving Hashem that way, and then he can be together with other people as should be. This is all going to lead us back to Shimon and Levi eventually. Let's take a look at some parallels from the famous first Hasidic Sefer, told us Yaakov Yosef, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polna, who really puts forth a lot of these principles. He says, the Pasuk B'chol drachecha da'eu, which we quoted from Mishlei before, to connect to Hashem, to know Hashem in all your ways. This includes sipurei dvarim shim chavero. This includes talking with your friend. V'yechaven shu kedei leiskarev etzlo. And even if the subject matter you're talking about, again, it's not negative, it's not lashon hara, but it's not divrei Torah, it's not lofty things. He says your kavana should be that you want to be close to him. You want to make a relationship with him. And then when you form such a relationship, he says, Im yevakesh mimenu ezeh dvar mitzvah v'yira, if you ask this person to do something in terms of mitzvahs and yiras Hashem, the person will be happy to do so because you're his friend. And this doesn't mean that you're falsely pretending to be the person's friend, talking to him about his day-to-day things. It's real, that you're actually really connecting to a person. There's real kirva, there's real closeness. In Parshas Shmos, he quotes the Magid Mibar. He says that by speaking with people, the hamonim, the masses out there, he says, by bringing yourself close to them, you're able to bring them close to Torah and mitzvahs. This, again, using the Kabbalistic Lashon that Hasidim will use, he said, Sheish liyached HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shchinte, that we have to unify HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina on all levels of people that are there, and in all levels of your life, even if it means you're not learning at that time. And another place that tells us, he says, if a person is on this level of just constant Torah and Tefillah and wearing sackcloth and crying and mourning over your shortcomings, the problem is also going to be when such a person goes out into the world, he's going to see other human beings who are not like him, and he's going to prosecute them in his mind. He's going to look down upon them. He says, as opposed to being mu'urav with them, by talking with them, by chatting with them, by learning, he says you're going to understand that b'chol d'rachecha da'eo means not just for you that you can serve Hashem by speaking to people about day-to-day things, but you suddenly discover their world. Shegam b'nei olam, gam b'oskim b'chayisha, that there are people out there. There are Jews who are not Talmidei Chachamim like you, who don't have the ability to spend hours in tefillah like you and soul-searching tshuva like you. But while they're doing their job, while they're being their accountants or shoemakers or farmers, they're connected to Hashem. Machshavtam dovka bo yisborach kamohu. Just like he's connected to Hashem, they are doing that in their own way. V'yochel adunam l'kaf schus, and you learn to judge them favorably by that. It reminds me of a story that was an eye-opener for me. Years ago, we were going to visit my cousins, my aunt and my cousins who were spending Pesach in Ashkelon. And we got on a bus. The kids were little then, and we rode to Ashkelon. When we got to the Tachana Merkazit in Ashkelon, so the bathrooms were needed. Now, I don't know that it's this way in any of the bus station bathrooms anymore. In those days, you would have a person sitting on a chair and a little table in front of the bathroom to whom you had to put a coin in the plate in order to get access. You were given a bit of tissue as well, and that was the process. So there in Ashkelon, there was an older gentleman, clearly a fairly recent immigrant from the Soviet Union, and the kids went in, and I was standing there next to him, and I was feeling bad. But this man got out of Russia, he moved to Eretz Yisrael, and he spends his days in a subterranean bathroom in Ashkelon, asking people to give their shekel in order to get in. And suddenly the man spoke to me. He gave me a smile. I remember some gold teeth kind of flashing at me. And he said, Matay bo Mashiach? When is Mashiach coming? I was a little flustered. I said, he can come now. He can come any day. B'chol yom sheyavo. And he smiled. He says, when he comes, there are clean bathrooms in Ashkelon waiting for him. Suddenly, everything was reframed. This was the Mashiach's custodian. This was a person who viewed his maintenance of the bathroom situation in Tachana Kazit in Ashkelon as something which would be ready for Mashiach when he comes and he pays his visit to Ashkelon. That's what's being described here. What the Tolda says is that there are many people that you don't understand are connected to Hashem in their very day-to-day involvements in ways that you don't see. He goes on, right, now back to the Merva Shemesh. He says, what this tells us is that a person cannot exclusively just Be masmid bilimudo tamid, only learning, but you have to take time to mix with people as well. When you do that, it has to be that you're coming with your Yirah Shamayim, with your fear of God, that you're always aware of the presence of God. Shivisi Hashem lenegdi tamid, right? And even though you're saying, how am I saying Shivisi Hashem negdi tamid when I'm involved in what seems to be bittul Torah and bittul tefillah, nonetheless, you'll remember that there's Avodas Hashem there. Sometimes, if you do feel that that environment is becoming antithetical to you, it's causing you to lose your connection. So you might want to take some more time where you sit by yourself and you remind yourself of those principles of your life again. But nonetheless, you have to go out and you will learn from them. Because Ezu Chacham Halomid Mikol Adam. Wise is the person who learns from everyone. Assorted with this, I saw a sefer that brought down a quote from a Beresh of Ushpitzin. Ushpitzin, for those who aren't familiar, is what the Polish called Auschwitz. He was a Talmid of the Chozeh of Lublin, and he said there are two types of people who, when they do a turnaround in their life, they want to do tshuva, they want to get more frum. Type number one suddenly views himself as so small and so low. Now, on one hand, that's good. That takes away a person's arrogance. But he says it has a detriment, because you're also going to view everybody else as very low, right? And therefore, you're going to be looking for other people's averas, and you're going to be looking for other things that are wrong with other people, and classifying them as bad as you view yourself. It ends up you'll be angry with them, you'll be angry with others. So yotza schara b'efsedo, whatever you gain by this piety is going to get lost by this anger and by looking down on people. Now, all of this sounds very Hasidish, and indeed, many of these principles are found, like we say, in some of the very beginning Svarim, like we were quoting from the Toldos Yaakov Yosef in the Marv HaShemesh. The Hashem's Ashgacha, I recently opened up a sefer I got quite a while ago from somebody else, and it's writings of Rav Eli Meir Bloch, the Rosh Hashiva of Telz, first in Europe, and then who founded it in Ohio, Cleveland, and Wycliffe. And he has a talk that he gave to the entire yeshiva in 1950 called HaYeshiva V'Ha'olam, the yeshiva and the world. And he says, Shelas matzavo shel ben hayeshiva biyachas l'chaya chevra shemichutz liyeshiva u'be'emes she'la bilti pshuta. The question of the situation of a yeshiva student, a ben yeshiva, related to vis-a-vis the life of society, of people outside the yeshiva, is not simple. Because on one hand, he needs a certain form of isolation in order to truly grow in Torah and mitzvahs, to focus, to have that purity of the environment and the thought which is there. And just even if the people you're mingling with outside aren't negative, but just the very fact that they're involved in so many different things in their day-to-day lives can end up distracting the yeshiva student, taking him out of that world of what's called the Arba Amos, the 4 Amos of the yeshiva. Sometimes the values are things that are antithetical to Torah as well, and it could influence the yeshiva student. However, he says, Tzorich ladas, ki hayeshiva eino mokum limud v'hashpah greido. Said yeshiva is not a place which is just where you learn and you grow and you elevate yourself. Ela should be yeshiva tzorich li'islamed, li'ischanech, li'isragel, l'chaim ba'asido. Yeshiva is a training ground. It's a place in which you have to learn to train yourself and to habituate yourself and prepare yourself for life in your future, which for most people is not going to remain in the walls of the yeshiva. It's like Isaac Sher, I quoted often, the founder of the Slobodka Yeshiva in Bnei Brak, son-in-law of the Alter of Slobodka. He said, yeshiva is not a place where you run away from life. Yeshiva is a place where you go to learn how to live. So he says, if this Bachur will, when he's in yeshiva, yistager ba'arma moseh shel yeshiva, he will close himself up in the 4 amos of the yeshiva, and he will not learn to get acclimated, lo yargil asatzmo l'chaye chevra, to the life of people in society, to be able to achieve this level described in the Chovos Halvavos, that you are Yoshev Bechevras B'nei Adam, you're sitting with other people and interacting with them, but Mizboded Im Kono, but still on that inner level, it's you and Hashem. Right? That's the way Victor Miller explains the concept of Hatznei Aleches Im Elokecha, that as you're going about and doing your things, in your inner world, you maintain your connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you don't do this, he says, the yeshiva student will not find derech hanachona. He won't find the proper path after he leaves the yeshiva. And he certainly will not be prepared to be mashpia al ha'olam, to influence from the Torah that he has learned the rest of the world, which is tu'udat kol ben Yisrael l'kadesh shem shamayim. That is the duty, that is the tafkid of any Ben Yisrael, to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim, to sanctify Hashem's name. And this is only possible if a person can be Mu'urav Imabrios, if you know how to be able to mix with people. Again, he quotes that Gemara in Ksuvos. So he says you have to find a path, you have to chart a path, Asher Tefasher Ben Shnei Ksuvos, that somehow combines and balances the two. That the Ben Yeshiva must be very serious and diligent in his life in the yeshiva, but among that, Yimtza Itim should find times that he'll have kesher with society, with people. He will get used to understanding them, to maintaining his proper position, even with other people in different surroundings. And now there's a line that is just so beautiful, I have to read it. He says, Gam ofen ha'ischabrus dorish limud. The yeshiva student also has to learn how to relate to people. It's not just enough to plunk yourself down among them. And here's the line, Ki ein lecha mafsid hashpa yosem misnobism. There is nothing that destroys your ability to be a positive influence than you being a snob. He said, Eina sviva soveles hisgos visparos b'yichud mitzirei yomim. The people around you, they cannot stand self-glorification and arrogance, especially of someone who is a young kid, a young bocher. It's impossible to have a positive influence on people unless you learn to become beloved by them. And you have to learn this. You have to learn how to be a chaver tov, to be a good friend. And along with that, not to lose your inner values, right? And not to stop viewing the solutions to problems and questions through the lens of Torah. Okay, so there is from, I guess, what you would call a true example of a Litvish yeshiva, right? She was known for its Rischa d'Oraisa, that Rav Moshe Shapiro Zatzal told us. Often his father, who learned in Telz first before joining the Slobodka Yeshiva in Hebron, spoke about the Rischa d'Oraisa, the fire of Torah that was in Telz, the way people argued. To the extent he said that once two of the Rebbeim were arguing in a sugya and one grabbed the other one's beard. So these are people who are very serious about the concept of yeshiva, about the environment of yeshiva, about the enthusiasm for yeshiva. But, like the Rav Shemesh, like the Toldos, he speaks about this idea of being Me'urav Imabrios. So now we have to go back to Shimon Levi. And the Rav Shemesh, how he completes, now looking at Yaakov Avinu's curse, so to speak, blessing to them. He says, going back to Shimon and Levi, they were on a very high madrega, but therefore their anger against people who did averos was very great, as we saw in Shechem. And they were unable to be people who could intermingle with others. But this was a holy anger. These were not people with anger issues. This was the Araisa de Kamarasach Behu, as we said, this was the Torah which was burning inside of them. So this is what Yaakov Avinu said to them. He said, Shimon v'Levi achim klei chamas mecheroseim, that your vessels of chamas, of violence, are yours, because they were always in this state of deep Yirah Shamayim, and therefore they were always angry with themselves. He says, as it's called in the Lashon Ashkenaz, frum. Therefore, it was hard for them to mix and mingle with other people. So they had to end up being people who lived b'izbodedus, alone, either totally alone or only with other people like them. That's what's called besod. They lived in their little secret society. And Yaakov Avinu says, besodom al tavo nafshi. In their secret society, let my nefesh not come. She'ein ritzoni bahem u'v'hanagosum. I do not want them and that behavior of theirs, because it comes from the side of mora deshchara, of dark bitterness, which is detrimental. He says, sometimes some of these people, these angry, God-fearing people, get together. He says, getting together is supposed to be something that raises people's spirits. But when such people get together, it's a gathering of dark bitterness. They're not besimcha as you're supposed to be when you get together with your fellow Jews. Therefore, Yaakov Avinu said, when they get together, let my kavod not rejoice there. Techad is a lotion of simcha and chedva, right? Like Vayichad Yisro. Yisro was happy in hearing what happened to Am Yisrael. He says, because when they gather together, the gathering is not one of simcha, but one of depression and darkness and anger. I do not want to be there. Ora apom ki oz, he cursed their anger, not themselves but their anger, and recognizing ki oz, that it comes from a place of azus. The word oz, as the Moreh Shemesh, is a code word for Torah, because the pasuk Hashem oz la'amo yitain is explained in the Medrash as Hashem giving Torah. This powerful, this strength, this boldness that comes from Torah. He says, but that anger result of their Torah is a beautiful thing. Their connection to Torah, their devotion to Torah, but this anger aspect is cursed. Right? Ve'evrosam ki kashasa, right? It goes on, right, that their averas were difficult. So he says, therefore, right, this is the idea, because they're in such great yira, and they're always in a state of evra, of anger, angry with themselves, because they're always looking at themselves as people who've done averas, even if it's tiny, even if it's small, they treat it as this huge avera. But this affects not just themselves, but affects their interactions with others. So therefore, what is their sentence? What is this curse-blessing? Achalkem bi Yaakov, I will divide them up among Yaakov, afitzem bi Yisrael. Now, I will scatter them among Yisrael. So the Moreh Shemesh points out that we have here the two names of Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov, which represents the lower aspect of Am Yisrael. Yisrael, which represents the higher aspect. Dahainu, which means, I'm going to force them to have to be able to mix in and intermingle and understand and relate to other people, and to learn from them, and to see the good in them, and to admire them. Because I'm going to scatter them out between people who are on the lower level, on the Yaakov level, and among the great ones who are on the soil level. And im kulam yudaitzemu revos bahem, and they have to learn to be mixed properly. And you should realize the word mu'urav also has in it the word orev, sweet. This I heard, I believe, the first time from Rishayo Hadari Zatzal. And he says, "V'yu tamid b'simcha." And the goal of this is not a punishment that's supposed to make them more depressed, more bitter. The goal is to get them into the proper way of joining together with people and looking at themselves and looking at others in the right way, so they can be totally besimcha. V'zehu avoda shlema kanal. And that is whole avoda. That is healthy avoda. That is what is trying to be portrayed there. So here we see, first of all, a much deeper and more meaningful picture of the bracha that Yaakov gives, the curse to their anger, the bracha to them, to Shimon and Levi. It gives us a very big picture of tendencies that everyone can find in themselves in their ups and downs in Judaism. Those times of fervor, which sometimes go wrong and become times of anger and depression. Anger at yourself, judgment of others in the wrong way, anger at others, sadness, loneliness, and guiding us to the proper way of maintaining Yiras Shamayim, of maintaining values, of maintaining devotion to Torah and to Tefillah, but understanding that whole Avodas Hashem can even be with sitting with a friend and schmoozing about something, even if it's not just a Dvar Torah. Asar B'Teves brings to mind the Chorbanos. We know our last Chorban was based on Sinas Chinam. And Sinas Chinam is already an end point after the very idea of just separation between people. Judgmentalism among people, anger at people, and like so many times, that becomes from judging yourself too harshly and being too angry with yourself. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu help us that this day will be on the road already to the Tikkun, where all the fast days which were set to get us to think about the Chorbanos will become, as the Navi said, the Sasan L'Simcha L'Moadim Tovim, days of great happiness and joy and special holidays, Moadim. Wishing everyone also a wonderful Shabbos. Kol Tov.